Buenos dias. In today's video, we're going to talk about subject pronouns in Spanish, how to use them, and what they are. And we're going to start with that by talking about subject pronouns in English so that we can compare the English and Spanish subject pronouns. So on the screen right now, you see the English subject pronouns. I, you, he, she, we, and they. I is called a first-person pronoun. I is always at the top of the chart, and it is always the first-person pronoun. You might recognize this from studying literature in an English class, because in many English classes you would learn that first-person point of view means that the narrator is using the pronoun I. For example, you might read in a story this following sentence. I was in my Spanish class when suddenly my cell phone rang. If you read a sentence like that, you know that the narrator is talking about themselves. That's first-person point of view, and I is a first-person pronoun. The pronoun at the bottom of the chart is called a third-person pronoun. In English, these are he and she. Again, you might recognize this from an English class. Third-person point of view means that the narrator uses the pronouns he or she, or people's names, in telling the story. For example, you might read in a story the following sentence. He was in his Spanish class when suddenly his cell phone rang. If you read that sentence, you know the narrator is not talking about themselves. They're talking about someone else. They're using third-person pronouns, and they're telling the story in third-person point of view. You might have noticed that I skipped second person. There is a second-person pronoun. It's the pronoun you. And you probably don't recognize second-person point of view from an English class or a literature class because it's not normally used in literature. If we were to read this in a story, the story would say something like this. You were in your Spanish class when suddenly your cell phone rang. There aren't very many stories written like that, as if they were talking to you. You might see that in a choose-your-own-adventure type story or in instructions for how to do something, but not in most novels or plays or other stories. It is used all the time in speaking English or Spanish, though, even though we don't see it as often in literature. We definitely need it for using a language. And so we now have all three types of pronouns. First-person pronoun for when you're talking about yourself. Second-person pronouns for when you're talking to someone. And third-person pronouns for when you're talking about someone. And they're in a logical order. Most people think of themselves first. I, for when you're talking about yourself, is the first-person pronoun. Most people probably think of whoever they're talking to second. That's the second-person pronoun, you. And then the other people who aren't part of the conversation, people would call he or she or they, those are third. Those are probably the people we think of last. And they're the third-person pronouns, he and she. So that's just kind of a way to remember it. You think of yourself first, so that's first person. You probably think of the person you're talking to second, so that's second person. And you probably think of everyone else third, so they are third person. And that can help you remember the order. The order is important to learn because we're going to see this on charts a lot of the time throughout this class. And they won't always have the pronouns on them. And so it's useful to know which is which by remembering the order of first, second, and third person pronouns and which pronoun is which. All of the pronouns that we've looked at so far are singular, referring to just one person. I, you, he, and she. If I want to talk about more than one person, I use the other half of the chart where it has the plural forms. It still has those same three types of pronouns. First person, second person, and third person. We is the first person plural form. So I use I if I'm talking about only myself, but I use we if I'm talking about myself together with other people. In both cases, I'm talking about myself, so it's first person. If I'm talking to someone, I use the pronoun you, and in English, we don't make a distinction between second person, singular, and plural forms. And we'll get back to that in a minute. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then for third person plural form in English, we say they. So if I'm talking about just one person, I say he or she. If I'm talking about more than one person, I say they. So I said we'd get back to talking about you, and we're going to do that right now. So in English, the singular and plural forms for second person are the same. They're both you. But there are a few other ways that we can distinguish between singular and plural you in English. So in older forms of English, there actually were two different forms. The singular form was thou, and the plural form was you. And we still see that sometime in older texts. We see that in plays or stories that were written, for example, plays written by Shakespeare in the 16th century. We see that in the Bible, and we see that in other older books that do use the word thou. We don't use it as often in modern English. For the plural form, we only have the word you, but we can emphasize that it's plural by adding to it. Sometimes we say you guys. Sometimes we say you all or all of you or y'all. Those are ways that we can explain that we're talking to more than one person. So even though we only have one word in English, the word you, there are a few different ways we can distinguish between them. And in the past, it would have been more obvious because in the past, we would have said thou if we were talking to one person and you if we were talking to more than one. Spanish still does that. So here are the subject pronouns again in English. I, you, he, she, we, you, and they. And again, the order that these are in is important to learn. We're always going to have the first person forms at the top, the second person forms in the middle, and the third person forms at the end. And we're always going to have the singular forms on the left side of the chart and the plural forms on the right. It's exactly the same in Spanish. We're going to have them in the same order. First person forms at the top, second person forms in the middle, third person forms at the bottom, singular forms on the left, plural forms on the right. So the first person pronouns that go at the top of the chart in Spanish are yo, nosotros, and nosotras. The singular form on the left side of the chart is yo. That means I, and that's what you'll use when you're talking about yourself. The plural forms on the right side of the chart are nosotros and nosotras. And both of those mean we, so you use those when you're talking about yourself and a group of people. If the group of people includes guys, you'll say nosotros. If the group of people is entirely girls, you will say nosotras. For the second person pronouns in Spanish, remember in English there's just one, you. In Spanish there's actually 5. Tú, usted, vosotros, vosotras, and ustedes. So here again we have the two in English, but you can see we've added a few things here. We have thou as the older form, we have you guys, we have y'all, we have all of you. Because even in English, where we don't have separate words for all these different types of you, sometimes we do need to distinguish between them. In Spanish, we always have to choose the right form, either tú, usted, vosotros, vosotras, or ustedes. So you use tú if you're talking to a person that you call by their first name, and they're just one person. It's the informal second person singular form that we use when we're talking to one person that we know well or that we call by their first name. We use usted if we're talking to one person we call by their last name, someone we want to show a little bit more formality to, or someone we don't know. So usted is the second person singular formal form that we use in those more formal situations. We use vosotros and vosotras only in parts of Spain when talking to a group of people that you call by their first name. And we use ustedes if we're talking about any other group, a group of people we call by their last names, or any type of group outside of those parts of Spain that use vosotros. So outside of Spain, you basically need to learn 3 forms: tú, usted, and ustedes. And the third person pronouns, which in English are he, she, and they. In Spanish are él, ella, ellos, and ellas. You use él if you're talking about one man, it means he. You use ella if you're talking about one woman, it means she. You use ellos if you're talking about a group of men or a group of men and women. And use ellas if you're talking about a group of women. So basically, ellos is the plural form of él, and ellas is the plural form of ella. For he, she, and they. And so again, here are our subject pronouns in Spanish, our complete chart. Yo, tú, usted, él, ella, nosotros, nosotras, vosotros, vosotras, ustedes, ellos, and ellas. If you feel comfortable with these now, you know what they all mean, you know how to use them, you can stop the video at this point, because after this, we're just going to go through these one by one in a little bit more of detail. The first one, the first person singular pronoun, is yo, which means I, and you use it when you're talking about yourself and only yourself. The second person singular pronoun is tú. This means you. And this is the informal form that you use with people you call by their first names, like your friends, your classmates, or children. In older English, this form would be thou. And if you look at how thou and tú are spelled, you can see there's a little similarity there. They both have the letters T and U. It's just that in English, we have some extra letters there in the middle. That might help you remember it. Tú is the informal form of you in Spanish. The formal form is usted. So this also means you. This is also a second person singular form, but this is the one that we're going to use with people we call by their last names or to people we don't know very well. Strangers, your boss, older people, or anyone else you want to show a little bit more formality with. For the third person singular forms, we have él, which means he. This is the third person masculine singular form, meaning we use it when we're talking to one man, or talking about one man. Él, which means he. If we're talking about one woman, we say ella for she. That's the third person feminine singular form, meaning we use it to talk about one woman. On the other side of the chart, we have the plural forms, the first of which is nosotros, which means we. This is the first person plural masculine form. So we use this when the group is a group of men or a group of men and women, and it includes us. We want to say we, nosotros. If the group is all girls, we change it to nosotras, which is the first person plural feminine form that you use when you're part of a group that consists entirely of women. The next form is vosotros, and this is one of the forms that's mainly used in Spain. And this is a plural form of tú. So you use it when you're talking to a group of people that you know well or that you call by their first names, like children or your friends or your classmates. So it's like saying you guys, but again, it's only used in parts of Spain. The feminine form of this is vosotras, which would be like saying you girls, that you'd say to a group of girls that you know well or that you call by their first names. And again, it's mainly only used in Spain. So outside of Spain, we will only use ustedes. Ustedes means the plural form of you, like saying you guys or you girls or you all. It doesn't matter if it's a group of men or a group of women or a group of both. And outside of Spain, it doesn't matter how well we know them. In Spain, we'll use vosotros if we use their first names, and ustedes if we use their last names. But outside of Spain, we'll use ustedes no matter what, to say a plural form of you. The next one is ellos, which means they. This is the plural form of él. So this is a third person plural masculine form that you use when you want to say they if it's a group of men or if it's a group of men and women. And the last form is ellas, which also means they. It's a third person plural feminine form that we use when it's a group of women with no men in the group. So now we've covered the whole chart. Yo, tú, usted, él, ella, nosotros, nosotras, vosotros, vosotras, ustedes, ellos, and ellas. So we have just one more thing to look at. When we make charts for verbs in Spanish, they're going to follow this exact same order. First person, second person, and then third person. Singular on the left, plural on the right. But for Spanish, we're going to make just one small change. We're going to take the words usted and ustedes, and we're going to move them down just a little bit. We're going to move them out of the second person row and put them into the third person row. They're still second person pronouns, but we're going to group them with the third person pronouns. And the reason for this is when we use verbs in Spanish, the verb endings for usted and ustedes work the same way as the third person pronouns, like this. So if I'm using the verb to be, I say usted es, él es, and ella es. For you are, he is, and she is. So even though usted is a second person pronoun, it uses the third person ending. So it makes more sense to group them with the third person pronouns. It's the same for ustedes. We say ustedes son to say you guys are. Just like we say ellos son to say they are. So even though ustedes is a second person pronoun, we group it with third person pronouns because it uses the same verb endings. So we're going to look at some examples that use these words in sentences. If I say, ¿Cómo eres tú? My pronoun is tú, which is the singular informal second person pronoun. And so the question, ¿Cómo eres tú? Means what are you like? We might answer that question with a first person pronoun, yo. Yo soy pelirroja. I am red-haired. The pronoun there is yo, and that's a first person singular pronoun. Yo soy pelirroja. Our next example is the word usted, which is the singular formal form of you that we use if we're talking to an older person or to a boss or to someone we call by their last name, or also a person that we don't know very well. Maybe we don't even know their name. We'd probably use usted with them to show a little bit more formality and respect. And so we say, ¿Cómo es usted? What are you like? And in that question, usted is the pronoun. If we're talking to a group of people, then we'll use the pronoun ustedes, the plural form of you. And this is where we might use vosotros if we were in Spain, if we were talking to people that we know well or who are younger than us. But we can see in the picture these people are gray-haired. They're probably older than us, and we're going to show a little bit more respect to them by using the ustedes form. ¿Cómo son ustedes? What are you like? If we're talking about someone else, we can say ella for she. Ella es rubia. She is blonde. That's a third person pronoun. Ella es rubia. If I'm talking about myself with a group, like these two boys who are talking to us, and they say, nosotros somos atléticos. We are athletic. They're talking to us, and they're two boys, and so they use the masculine first person plural form, which is nosotros. Nosotros somos atléticos. If we were talking about them, we would use the third person pronouns to talk about them. We'd use the masculine form because they're two guys, and we'd say ellos son atléticos. They are athletic. Using ellos, the third person plural pronoun. If it's a group of girls who are talking to us, they're going to use the first person plural feminine form, which is nosotras. Nosotras somos energéticos. We are energetic. They're talking about a group. Everyone in the group is a girl, so they use the nosotras form. And if we were talking about them, we would say they, using the feminine form again. So we would say ellas. Ellas son energéticas. So those are the subject pronouns in Spanish. And remember that it will help you to learn the order they come in on the chart. First person pronouns for when you're talking about yourself come at the top. Second person pronouns for when you're talking to someone come next. Third person pronouns for when you're talking about someone else come at the bottom of the chart. The singular forms are on the left and the plural forms are on the right. That's something that will be useful for you to study so that you can learn that. And that's all for today. Hasta la próxima.